Opening of the meeting. The 9,920th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. Adoption of the agenda. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Islamic Republic of Iran, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and the Syrian Arab Republic and Turkey to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Geir Petersen, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, and Mr. Ramesh Rahajinham, Director, Coordination Division, Head of and Representative of the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Geneva. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Geir Petersen.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Today, I'm briefing you from Damascus, where the atmosphere is ripe with cautious optimism and a yearning for renewal following far-reaching international moves on Syria. Last week, in a significant development celebrated across Syria, United States President Trump announced from Riyadh that he would order the cessation of sanctions on Syria. Yesterday, the European Union announced the lifting of its economic sanctions on Syria. The UK revoked their previous sanctions regime last month. I have long called for bold steps on sanctions, as have millions of Syrians in and outside the country, and I warmly welcome these international steps. I also warmly welcome the support extended by regional countries to Syria and its people, most notably Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and other key partners. This includes not only initiatives on sanctions relief, but also to resolve Syria's outstanding obligations to international financial institutions, support in the payment of public sector salaries, and ensuring the provision of critical energy resources. Mr. President, these are indeed historic developments. They hold major potential to improve living conditions across the country and to support the Syrian political transition. And they give the Syrian people a chance to grapple with the legacy of misrule, conflict, abuses, and poverty from which they are trying to emerge. We will follow closely and support the moves to lift sanctions. But we also know that Syria faces significant structural challenges with an economy ravaged by over a decade of war and conflict and a host of other destabilizing factors. Revitalizing a devastated economy will require from the interim authorities sustained actions, including on overall economic reform and governance standards across the financial system. And this will need international support. Mr. President, I have taken note of the decrees issued last week by the interim authorities announcing the establishment of two keenly anticipated and key institutions, the National Commission for Transitional Justice and the National Commission for Missing Persons. The decree appointed their respective heads and gave them 30 days to form a team and develop internal regulations. The creation of a dedicated commission for missing persons attests to the centrality of this issue in the Syrian national experience. which has impacted almost every Syrian household, as we have heard from Syrians time and again. In its next steps, we hope this Commission will move to cooperate with the UN dedicated bodies, Syrian civil society, and above all, with victims and survivors associations who have formulated concrete proposals for their inclusion in such a process. The creation of a Transitional Justice Commission is another essential stepping stone in Syria's recovery from conflict and the restoration of Syria's right to the truth, justice, and reparation. Victim-centered, inclusive, and comprehensive approach to transitional justice in line with the Constitutional Declaration as well as international standards. I appreciate the openness and willingness of interim authority representatives to engage with us on many of these issues. I note the recent constructive meetings between my deputy, Najat Rochdi, and several cabinet members, which provided an important opportunity to explore further avenues of cooperation. Mr. President, I have reported and continue to track closely concerns expressed by many Syrian women on a host of challenges. At the same time, I am pleased to report that the Syrian Women's Advisory Board was able to meet for the first time in Syria, in Damascus, since its inception in 2016. WAB members met the Minister of Social Affairs and Labour and a member of the Supreme Fatwa Council for in-depth discussions, as well as Syrian women counterparts and diplomatic representatives. WAB members and Syrian women more broadly continue to reinforce the importance of their political participation, to remind interlocutors of their unique position to observe the situation on the ground, and stress their willingness to offer advice to the interim authorities. In their engagements, the Women's Advisory Board members sought clarification on ministerial strategy, including the expected role of civil society, and reassurances that women's political engagement would indeed be ensured. Mr. President, in accordance with the Constitutional Declaration, a crucial next step in the Syrian political transition will be to establish a high committee responsible for selecting the members of the new People's Assembly, a process that includes electing 2/3 of its members. This transitional legislative authority will be responsible for working on an urgent legislative reform agenda, a critical part of rebuilding Syria's political consensus, state institutions, and creating the necessary framework on the economy, justice, political parties, elections, and much else besides. I have discussed with the interim authorities the need for substantive efforts towards inclusivity, transparency, and openness, all of which can help ensure the People's Assembly is seen as representative of the unity and diversity of the nation. I have shared concrete ideas on this with the interim authorities, and we look forward to furthering this engagement and support. Syrians also continue to look ahead to the envisaged future constitutional process, which needs to be inclusive of all social and political components in shaping a new social contract and paving the way for the free and fair elections as called for by Mr. al-Shara from the outset. However, Mr. President, there are immediate challenges of protection and confidence and participation that need to be squarely faced. In this regard, there were serious setbacks in late April when tensions dramatically escalated in Druze majority residential areas in Damascus suburbs and then on the outskirts of Sveida Governorate. This came against the background of heightened sectarian incitement. The violence left residents terrified. It caused dozens of casualties among civilians, armed Druze factions, and state security personnel, with reports of mortar and heavy weapons fired into Sveida. Clashes eventually subsided following agreements between the interim authorities and Druze representatives, but tensions remain, with fresh reports of rocket attacks into Sveida last night. Mr. President, the intra-Syrian efforts to ease tensions and maintain shared security and stability need to continue. I welcome Interim President al-Shara's statement on 2nd May, in which he prioritized dialogue and cooperation within the framework of national unity. But, and I must add, I remain concerned about the potential for new violence and at the undermining of trust that such developments inevitably bring about. Deputy Special Envoy Rochdi visited Sveida in the aftermath of the clashes and met the governor of Sveida and various groups, including Druze sheikhs, Christian and Muslim religious leaders, Bedouin tribes, leaders of armed factions, and civil society representatives. She appreciated the open and substantive discussions on various challenges, including those faced by thousands of Druze students from Sveida who were assaulted at university dormitories in several cities. As a result of these attacks, many students were forced to abandon their studies and return to Sveida. Similar concerns have been raised regarding Alawite students in the coastal regions who are dropping out of school due to ongoing security threats. Mr. President, let me also note my alarm at renewed Israeli airstrikes in Syria in the reporting period, including during the violence in Druze areas and close to the presidential palace. Such attacks are unacceptable and must cease. Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity must be respected. There are clearly diplomatic possibilities, and these must be prioritized. Meanwhile, Mr. President, the unacceptable violence and incitement of communal tensions in Druze areas came on the back of the grave incidents that took place in the coastal areas in March. The situation there also remains fragile. The fact-finding committee continues to examine incidents since March 6th. Deputy Special Envoy Rochdi met its member during a visit to the coast and was briefed on ongoing efforts to collect testimonies. She also met representatives from Alawite community and civil society groups who expressed deep concern about security and economic hardship, with women being particularly affected by the current situation. Interlocutors stressed the urgent need to address the growing polarization and foster mutual understanding among the different communities. As Interim President al-Shara noted in his recent address, coexistence is part of Syria's heritage and history, and it must be preserved at all cost. Efforts to counter hate speech and promote media freedom more broadly are indispensable in this regard. Mr. President, further steps in security sector reform are also clearly needed. along with measures on disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. And, as I have reminded this Security Council about many times, action on the core issue of foreign fighters also needed. Ultimately, I hope that this can contribute to the positive intention to ensure that no weapons can be held outside of state control. And I take note of the interim defense minister's call on armed groups that have yet to integrate with the security apparatus to do so before 28 May. And I am concerned at reports of recent attacks by unknown groups on Hmeimim Air Base. Mr. President, I'm also concerned that ISIL has been escalating its attacks in various areas in recent weeks, with signs of more coordinated operations involving IEDs and the use of medium-range weapons. Mr. President, regarding the Northeast, the 10th March Agreement continues to present a historical opportunity to solve one of the key outstanding issues in this conflict. We are continuing to deepen our engagement in support of this process, with whose success is critical for this transition to succeed. We have seen worrying tensions and violence around Tisrim Dam, both in late April and then again this week. We have also seen long periods of de-escalation, with the two sides continuing to talk through committee meetings. This process needs to move forward. Compromises will be needed on both sides, and progress on all key aspects of the agreement is a priority for stability in Syria and the region, for the restorations of Syria's sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity, and for the success of the overall political transition. Mr. President, the challenges facing Syria are enormous, and the real dangers of renewed conflict and deeper fragmentation have not yet been overcome. However, the Syrian people have taken heart from the fact that the decision of the last week to lift sanctions give them a better chance than before to succeed against great odds. The Syrians are looking to the interim authorities to seize this moment and push towards a fully inclusive transition in line with the principles of Security Council Resolution 2254, and to all of us to do our part as genuine partners in support. The United Nations is absolutely committed to playing its full role in this regard. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Pedersen for his briefing, and I now give the floor to Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham.
Thank you, Mr. President. And following on from the Special Envoy's assessment, allow me to update you on the latest humanitarian situation in Syria, where over a decade of conflict has pushed 90% of the population into poverty, displacing nearly 7.5 million people within Syria and over 6 million people more as refugees. Now, after so many years of suffering and hardship, Syrian people have renewed hope. Mr. President, I would like to highlight 3 points for the Council's attention. First, humanitarian needs remain immense across 18.5 million Syrians need protection and humanitarian assistance. Over half the population is food insecure. Nearly 3 million people face severe food insecurity. And more than 670,000 men, women, and children have been displaced since November last year. This includes 15,000 people displaced between 30 April and 6 May from rural Damascus due to the violence in the Druze majority areas. At the same time, since December, over 1 million internally displaced people have returned to their areas of origin including some 330,000 people from camps in northwest Syria. Damaged homes, lack of adequate services, and the threat of unexploded ordnance are inhibiting returns. The major women and girls continue to be at risk of gender-based violence, although social stigma, fear of retaliation, a lack of protection services, and of trust in these services mean that such violence is often underreported. In addition, since December, more than 900 civilians have been killed or injured by unexploded ordnance, with children accounting for over 1/3 of casualties. Since our last briefing, 200 people have been killed or injured by remnants of war. In northern Syria, access to water remains limited, while across the country, the health system remains under incredible strain amid growing demand and following years of degradation. Mr. President, is being made. UN and partners are reaching millions each month through in-country and cross-border operations. More than 1,000 trucks loaded with assistance have entered Syria from Turkey since the start of this year, a 7-fold increase compared to last year, as cross-border access remains a cost-effective modality now reaching areas beyond the northwest. Last month, the World Health Organization and UNICEF, supporting the Interim Health Ministry, have successfully conducted a vaccination campaign reaching 3.4 million children. The World Food Programme reaches over 1.5 million people every month with critical food assistance. The Syrian interim authorities continue to facilitate our vital humanitarian work across the country, and we are actively engaging with them to further streamline procedures and reduce bureaucratic constraints, including easing the registration of humanitarian NGOs. And Mr. President, finally, I would like to highlight the alarming funding situation. The UN and its partners are appealing for $2 billion to reach 8 million of the most vulnerable people from January through June 2025. As of today, only 10% of that appeal has been funded. The consequences are already visible and will become more so as time passes and as funding cuts take hold. The growing return of Syrians, over 1 million internally displaced persons and 500,000 refugees from neighboring countries since December 2024, will also mean that needs will increase. Dozens of community centers and hospitals face closure in the coming weeks. Some already have closed. And in northeast Syria, conditions in camps such as Tala, Arisha, and Tuene are deteriorating as most services remain suspended due to funding shortfalls. General food assistance has already been suspended in Tel Samen and Twahina camps, compounding food insecurity, malnutrition, and psychosocial distress. In northwest Syria alone, 40 of 83 protection centers have closed, leaving huge gaps in services for vulnerable people, including children and persons with disabilities. Additionally, 20 safe spaces for women and girls have closed since January, severely reducing access to support services for survivors of gender-based violence. And these are just some examples. Funding shortfalls do not mean that humanitarian needs disappear. On the contrary, they cause these needs to intensify. And the absence of support now risks reversing the small gains made over the past months. Despite the catastrophic drop in funding, the UN and our partners a full preparation of the response with ever less resources. In parallel, the Syria Humanitarian Fund has initiated an $8 million allocation to respond to urgent needs in the Northeast, where services have been severely impacted by recent funding cuts. And an additional $60 million allocation is expected to be launched soon to address some of the most critical humanitarian needs across the country. UN agencies and their partners are currently implementing a $20 million allocation from the Central Emergency Response Fund to support over 1.2 million Syrians, This includes a $3 million World Health Organization project to provide health care, including over 1.3 million treatment courses. It also includes a $3 million project by the UN Mine Action Service to clear explosive ordnance, which continue and maim Syrians. Mr. President, the international donor community needs to act fast and increase humanitarian funding. While humanitarian support remains needed in key locations, it is critical to unlock longer-term support and sustainable interventions to help Syrians return, build back, and get back on their feet, and to reduce humanitarian need. Member states should start looking at options to do so. In this regard, the United States plans to lift sanctions on Syria, as Mr. Pedersen has just mentioned, as well as the European Union's recent decision to lift its economic sanctions, can be expected to facilitate relief, recovery, and development. And we continue our engagement with sanctions and other restrictions do not hinder humanitarian operations. Mr. President, the Syrian people have shown resilience, but they cannot endure this crisis alone, and we must act with utmost urgency. And help lay the groundwork for long-term recovery. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I thank Mr. Rasingiham for his briefing. We will circulate the brief because we had lost the connection on some occasions. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Hellenic Republic. At the outset, let me thank Special Envoy Pedersen, Geir, as well as OCHA Director Rasingiham for their briefings. Change is usually gradual, and one does not come so often across a seismic shift. The fall of the former regime in Syria in the beginning of December was such a shift. Hope was rekindled for the Syrian people, whether residing in their country or spread around the globe. As Secretary General has said, we must keep this flame of hope alive, despite challenges that could extinguish it. Today, Syria has a historic opportunity to achieve progress and prosperity and to be a factor of stability for the wider region. Historically tied with the Syrian people, Greece wholeheartedly supports and will continue supporting these efforts. It was in this spirit that I visited Damascus as early as February and have since taken part in international conferences in Paris and Brussels. We are ready to contribute more to reconstruction of Syria and to ensure the preservation of its rich ethnic and religious diversity. Today, I would like to highlight the following 3 points. First, Syria will thrive once a fully inclusive political transition in line with the principles of UN Security Council Resolution 2254 has been completed. Syria's wealth and greatness lies in the diversity of its people, a mosaic of different parts, all capable of flourishing together in peace and harmony. In this sense, its transitional government must stay the course of political inclusiveness and openness, one that ensures the protection and integration of all components of Syrian society, be it Christian, Alawite, Druze, or Kurdish, and one that includes the active participation of all Syrians, including women. Some positive signs, as expressed by Special Envoy Pedersen, need to be further enhanced. We believe that there is a lot of room for improvement in this regard. The transitional government should ensure full political representation for all Syrians, taking account of the demographic structure of the country and building credible and representative institutions. Also, the Constitution, to follow the Constitutional Declaration, must echo the voices of multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, rich in cultural, ethnic, and religious diversity. We believe that keeping the national dialogue alive with the inclusion of civil society and other voices of all backgrounds is crucial in these respects. The agreement reached between the SDF and Damascus on March 10th is valuable, committing the parties to engaging non-violently. We believe addressing issues such as the Tirsin Dam, which constitutes critical infrastructure for ensuring water and energy security, is a positive step. We remain vigilant on the agreement's implementation, hoping that it will contribute to regional stability. The transitional government should ensure that armed groups in the north of the country do not disrupt the process. We call on all regional actors to refrain from violence or inviting escalation in this regard. The withdrawal of foreign fighters and the integration of all armed groups into national security forces, while ensuring that all terrorist and violent extremist elements are excluded as part of a widened and robust effort of security sector reform, is a prerequisite for internal security and political stability. Second, we expect the transitional government to ensure accountability and promote transitional justice. Any regression in this task will prove detrimental. This Council very strongly condemned sectarian violence, culminating in the tragic death of some 1,000 innocent civilians, mostly Alawites and Christians, in the coastal region in March, and expects the outcome of the investigative committee established to be published soon. Perpetrators must be brought to justice and accountability served. We're equally concerned by the violence that erupted in the south, mostly targeting members of the Druze community. For Syria to turn the page, no effort can be spared to end sectarian violence. It is crucial that the transitional authorities maintain order, ensure control over armed groups, protect all Syrians regardless of their background, and hold all perpetrators accountable without delay in line with international law norms and standards. Greece calls for a swift, transparent, credible, and impartial investigation by the investigative committee and for the relevant UN mechanisms to be allowed to also investigate these crimes. All Syrians should be able to live without fear. We welcome the participation of Foreign Minister Saibani at the General Assembly discussion on the latest report of the Triple I mechanism, as well as his expressed willingness to cooperate with international mechanisms for promoting accountability. The transitional government owes it to the Syrian people to hold to its word on the following steps, and the word is eager to see their deeds matching their rhetorics. Which brings me to my third and last point. All of the above transpires against the backdrop of a truly precarious and challenging economic and security situation. As outlined in the briefings we listened today, Syria faces widespread destruction and devastation. For this reason, Greece was among those who pledged their tangible support for Syria's recovery at the 9th Brussels conference in March. Greece remains committed to supporting Syrians as they rebuild their nation and strive towards a free and democratic future. Equally, the European Union was swift in suspending certain restrictive measures as part of a gradual, conditional, and reversible approach to support Syria. We shall continue ever vigilant to closely monitor developments with the aim to examine further suspensions on the basis of concrete progress on accountability, inclusivity of the political process, as well as continuous respect of international law, the international law of the sea, and respect of the sovereign rights of neighboring states. The announcement by President Trump of lifting US sanctions presents a big opportunity for Syria, which has to work closely with all of its neighbors so as to promote regional stability and cooperation. Supporting Syria is also crucial in a context where the threat of radical groups re-emerging is present and where foreign fighters may still roam free. Ensuring the viability and security of camps holding ISIS fighters and their relatives in northeast Syria is critical in this regard. Ultimately, supporting the stability of Syria will allow its rich and talented diaspora to safely and voluntarily return home as they deserve. Last but not least, we would be remiss not to reiterate our full support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria, which must be fully respected by all, upholding relevant international agreements and UNSC resolutions, international law, including the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, as well as sovereign rights, must be respected. Dear colleagues, in conclusion, Greece wants to see Syria succeed and become a peaceful and prosperous country to the benefit, first and foremost, of Syrian people, but also of the wider region, and as a symbol for the world at large that a country can indeed make a comeback even from the most adverse circumstances. To get there, we believe its leadership should embrace a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned, truly inclusive political transition, promoting accountability, transitional justice, and viable reconciliation. We fully support the role of the UN and Special Envoy Pedersen along this track. Thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to those Council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor, first of all, to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President, and we welcome your participation in this meeting, Mr. Foreign Minister. I also wish to thank Special Envoy Pedersen and Director Rajasingham for your briefings. Mr. President, summer is right around the corner, and as a new season begins, the first 6 months of a new chapter for Syria draws to a close. It has been a seismic shift, as you said, Mr. Foreign Minister, and many important changes have happened, as we also heard from the Special Envoy. Now the positive statements of the last 6 months must be followed up with concrete action to meet the expectations of the Syrian people. With this in mind, let me make 3 points. First, the security situation needs to be improved. Reports about continued sectarian violence, in particular involving Alawites and Druze, and including killings of civilians, are deeply alarming. We condemn any such attacks, and we call on the Syrian transitional government to clearly condemn them in word and in deed. In this respect, we look forward to seeing the conclusions from the fact-finding committee, as well as a proper follow-up to ensure accountability. Accelerating the political process and making the process generally inclusive is the only way to channel grievances into politics and away from violence. Accountability for past atrocities will counter calls for revenge and contribute to the prevention of new violence. We welcome the appointment of a Transitional Justice Commission and a Commission on Missing Persons. The next step should, as mentioned by the Special Envoy, be a selection of members of Legislative Assembly that credibly represents all segments of society, as well as engaging with civil society to create a truly inclusive political process in line with Resolution 2254. We voice our full support for the UN and Special Envoy Geir Pedersen in assisting this transition. Second, for genuine security for Syria also necessitates peaceful relations with Syria's neighbors. Recent dialogue between Syria's transitional government and Lebanon about long-standing border issues and refugees create hope for a better future for both countries. The signing of an MOU with Jordan just yesterday is also a positive development. Similarly, outstanding issues in southern Syria and the occupied Golan Heights must be resolved through diplomacy, not military means, as also mentioned by the Special Envoy. We reiterate our call for the full implementation of the 1974 agreement by all parties. In the wider region, last week's meetings in Riyadh were important and a signal of strong support to Syria from the GCC countries. We welcome the United States' announcements on the lifting of sanctions against Syria. Yesterday, the European Union also agreed to lift all economic sanctions on Syria. This is historic and gives the Syrian people further opportunity to rebuild and prosper. This leads me to my third point about the humanitarian situation and reconstruction. With sanctions being lifted, there are better prospects for improving the humanitarian situation. Unlocking access to building materials, technologies, and the ability to invest will play a decisive role in the possibilities for reconstruction, including repairing the shattered critical health, energy and agricultural industry, and infrastructure throughout the country. If managed in an equitable manner, this can help reverse the spiking rates of hunger, poverty, and the overall healthcare gap throughout the country. With millions planning to return home to Syria, this reprieve comes at a timely moment. Mr. President, as Syrians have experienced tremendous changes these last 6 months, many challenges still remain. We appreciate that there are no quick fixes, but after years of suffering, the people of Syria are impatient for change. We support the Syria transitional government in this endeavor, and we want to see Syria succeed, as you also highlighted, Mr. Minister. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
President, Minister, we're grateful to the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, Mr. Geir Pedersen, and the Director of the Coordination Division, Head and Representative of OCHA in Geneva, Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham, for their thorough overview of the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic. The situation there, regrettably, remains very tense. Its explosive potential is fueled by the very challenges which we discussed 1 month ago, 2 months ago, that is, acute inter-ethnic and inter-religious disagreements, state-building difficulties, the terrorist threat, as well as violations of the sovereignty of Syria's territory. Syria had barely recovered from the shock prompted by March events on the west coast, when hundreds of people died, mainly Alawites as well as Christians, at the hands of radical groups. Syria had barely recovered when, in late April, new armed clashes flared up in the neighborhood surrounding the capital in Jeramana, with the participation of another ethnic group, the Druze. Over 140 people perished and roughly 15,000 people were compelled to flee their homes. These events demonstrate the fragility of the current situation and the need to take serious steps to strengthen interfaith and interethnic accord in the country. This is critically important for Syrian statehood to be built on a robust foundation which neither internal nor external threats can destabilize. We call on Damascus to attach particular attention to this, because resolving this issue is what the Syrian political process hinges on, as well as the very fate of the country. A positive example is the agreement signed by Damascus with the Syrian Democratic Forces. However, when it comes to ensuring justice for other groups in Syria, much remains to be done on that front. Specifically, this is something the committee tasked with fact-finding and investigating events on Syria's west coast, this is something the committee should do. We hope that the committee will be comprehensive, transparent, independent, and impartial, in keeping with international standards, so as to hold all perpetrators to account, as per the relevant Security Council presidential statement. This is a demand in the statement. It's important for the outcome of the investigation to be communicated to the Special Envoy and to the Security Council. Among other challenges, there's a serious threat posed to this day by terrorist groups operating in Syria. We hope that the new Syrian leadership will take active steps to resolve the issue of foreign terrorist fighters once and for all. FTFs pose a threat not just to Syria, but also to the region and to the entire world. Now, we cannot discuss robust Syrian statehood unless its territorial integrity and sovereignty is respected by all UN member states, including Syria's neighbors. We condemn Israel's arbitrary airstrikes across the country, as well as the expansion of the occupation zone in the south, which in practice paralyzed the activities of UNDOF, the Disengagement Observer Force. We need to successfully ensure that Israel returns to compliance with the Disengagement of Forces Agreement dated 1974 to stop shelling Syrian territory and to withdraw its forces from Syria, especially given that Damascus has reaffirmed its willingness to engage constructively with all of its neighbors without exception, and it's done that on numerous occasions. President, the humanitarian crisis in Syria is one of the most acute and protracted. For many years now, the Syrian people have lived with shortages of basic necessities, instability, and the constant threat to being posed to their lives. The ongoing economic decline only serves to exacerbate the situation. Despite the efforts of UN humanitarian agencies, which are assisting over 2 million people per month, well, this is clearly not enough to cover all of the population's needs. The situation is exacerbated by the reduction of international aid. Only 10% of the necessary $2 billion required for the January-June period has been received to date. We're particularly disquieted by reports about the halting of food aid, including that in Tel El-Samen and Twahina camps in the northeast of the country. In the northwest, 42 out of the 82 protection centers offering help to vulnerable groups have closed, and roughly 170 medical facilities are facing the threat of having to shut their doors. This is happening against the backdrop of incipient progress on Syrian returnees, a process which will not reduce, but on the contrary, increase the scope of humanitarian need. Unfortunately, in parallel with returns, we're seeing the opposite trend, that is, new mass displacement, including owing to the flare-ups of violence I alluded to earlier. Since November of last year, over 674,000 people have been compelled to flee the places where they were living, a clear demonstration of the fragility of the situation. We've taken note of the statement by President Trump regarding steps to lift all U.S. sanctions on Syria. For many years, we consistently pointed out that these illegal unilateral economic measures seriously hamper the country's recovery and exacerbate the humanitarian situation of civilians. This fact is gradually being recognized in UN entities. Special Envoy Geir Pedersen just a few days ago, and in fact today, he said that the lifting of sanctions is decisive for ensuring life-saving health and education services, for Syria's economic recovery, for attracting support from countries in the region, and for giving Syrians the opportunity to actively participate in the country's recovery effort. Isn't this just a repetition of what we've been saying for years now? Unfortunately, these very clear-cut truths are only now starting to be uttered out loud, 14 years after the conflict began. We unswervingly support the mobilization of broad-based humanitarian assistance to all Syrians. Such assistance should be free from discrimination, politicization, and any preconditions, in keeping with the relevant principles enshrined in UNGA Resolution 46/182. President, the Russian Federation reasserts its unqualified commitment to the unity, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of Syria. We care deeply about the fate of our brother people, the Syrians. We stand convinced that Syrians themselves can decide their own fate. We want to see a strong, independent, prosperous, and stable Syria. For this, it's important for every ethnic, for every religious group to feel neither oppressed nor marginalized, for each group to get proper representation in the security services and in other power structures. At the same time, there is no place for foreign terrorist fighters in Syria. FTFs have blood on their hands, and they have nothing to do with the Syrian people. We believe there is no other option but an inclusive political process led and owned by all Syrians without exception, with the support of the UN and in accordance with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. We extend our support to the efforts of Special Envoy Pedersen. We also deem it important to ensure that international support for intra-Syrian dialogue to be universal in nature. We intend to develop multifaceted cooperation with Syria with due regard for our extensive historical experience and the long-standing tradition of friendship and mutual respect which characterize Russo-Syrian relations. We're convinced that the Syrian people will overcome all of the challenges they face with dignity. We stand ready to engage with Syria in a practical fashion and to provide its people and government with the assistance necessary for them to withstand the difficulties of the transition period. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me thank the Secretary General's Special Envoy and OCHA Director for their informative briefings on the constantly evolving situation in Syria. President Trump's watershed trip to the Gulf this month has created the opportunity for a new chapter of peace and prosperity in the region. 6 months after Syrians celebrated the end of the despotic Assad regime, President Trump pledged sanctions relief for Syria to give Syrians, as he said, a chance at greatness. The president wants to see Syria and the entire region thrive. That's why he's made a bold decision on Syria with the hope the new government will take this opportunity to rebuild and take the country from being a source of instability to a source of stability. U.S. government agencies are now working to execute the president's direction on Syria sanctions. We look forward to issuing the necessary authorizations that will be critical to bringing new investment into Syria to help rebuild Syria's economy and put the country on a path to a bright, prosperous, and stable future. The United States also has taken the first steps toward restoring normal diplomatic relations with Syria. To meet this moment of opportunity for peace and prosperity, Syria's government must continue to take bold steps and show sustained progress on the clear expectations the United States has communicated. We call on Syria to make peace with its neighbor Israel and join the Abraham Accords, ending a conflict that has plagued this region for far too long. We call on Syria to quickly remove foreign terrorist fighters from the Syrian military and ensure foreign terrorists, including Palestinian militias, can no longer operate from Syria. We call on Syria to cooperate with the United States and our coalition partners to prevent the resurgence of ISIS and ensure our collective security. And we call on Syria to work constructively with the United States and the Syrian Democratic Forces to assume responsibility for the detention facilities and the Al-Hol and Raj displaced persons camps in the northeast part of the country. In that regard, we also call on member states to take responsibility for their displaced and detained nationals through expeditious repatriation and to support the returns of displaced Syrians to their areas of origin. The new government should also ensure all Syrians have a stake in the country's political future and that the rights of all citizens are protected regardless of religion or ethnicity. We take note of the Syrian government's actions so far on critical files, including the destruction of Bashar Assad's chemical weapons and the search for missing U.S. and foreign citizens in Syria. This should give us hope for what Syrians can achieve and set expectations for what must come next. Colleagues, President Trump's recent trip to the Gulf reaffirmed our commitment to partners in the region, and Secretary Rubio's engagement opened a new chapter in our relationship with Syria. In that spirit, we continue to urge the new government to choose policies that will reinforce stability, protect human rights of all Syrians, assure peace with Syria's neighbors, develop Syria's economy, and become, at long last, a responsible member of the international community. And with that, I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Your Excellency, Foreign Minister of Greece, I welcome you presiding over today's meeting. I thank Special Envoy Patterson and Director Raja Singham for their briefings. I welcome the presence of representatives of Syria, Iran, Qatar, the UAE, and Turkey at today's meeting. President, China has been closely following developments in Syria and sincerely hopes to see Syria restore peace and stability at an early date with the help of the international community. Recently, the Syria interim authorities have been actively interacting with the international community, striving to gain recognition and support. Despite concerns on some issues, the international community has responded positively and with goodwill to Syria's efforts. We hope that Syria's interim authorities will seize the opportunity and translate commitments into real action to restore stability and development as soon as possible. Let me make 3 points. First, To realize a broad and inclusive political transition is the shared expectation of the international community. China hopes that relevant Syrian parties, guided by the principles set out in Council Resolution 2254, will act in the long-term interests of the country and the people and promote a broad and inclusive political transition in an orderly manner. On the basis of thorough consultation and communication, the UN should play an active role in this process, and all parties should support Special Envoy Patterson in implementing his mandate. China is concerned about recent cases of severe violence in southern Syria, which resulted in hundreds of civilian casualties. Syria's interim authorities should take effective measures to ease communal tensions and guarantee the safety, security, and rights of all Syrian people. We call for expediting investigations into the violent incidents in Syria's coastal areas so as to arrive at conclusions that can surely withstand scrutiny. Second, to combat foreign terrorist fighters is the shared concern of the international community. The presence of FTFs in Syria not only threatens Syria's own security, but also poses serious challenges to regional and even global security and stability. To counter terrorism allows no double standards. Any negligence of duty, any condoning of terrorists will have serious consequences that will ultimately backfire. The strict implementation of relevant Council resolutions on counterterrorism is an obligation under international law that should be fulfilled by all parties. We urge Syria's interim authorities to immediately take all necessary measures to combat all terrorist groups listed by the Council, including ATEM, aka Turkestan Islamic Party. Syria should never become a safe haven for terrorism. Third, to alleviate the humanitarian situation and kickstart economic reconstruction is a shared task for the international community. As we speak, the humanitarian situation on the ground is dire. Humanitarian operations are severely underfunded, and approximately 40% of the hospitals cannot operate normally, which is worrying. China's consistent position is that relevant countries should lift illegal unilateral sanctions on Syria, and we hope that the Syrian interim authorities will, in the context of the changing developments, prioritize economic recovery and improving people's livelihoods in their governance. The international community, especially traditional donors, need to increase their assistance to Syria and make greater efforts to alleviate the humanitarian crisis. In the long run, only through realizing self-driven development can Syria's humanitarian and economic difficulties be resolved fundamentally. Syria used to be a country enjoying sound economic development in the Middle East. We believe that with the help of the international community, the hardworking and intelligent Syrian people will soon be able to embark on the path of national reconstruction. Finally, let me reiterate that Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity must be respected. The Golan is universally recognized by the international community as occupied Syrian territory. The 1974 disengagement of forces agreement should be abided by, and Israel should immediately stop its military operations against Syria. Together with the international community, China will continue to play a constructive role in helping Syria achieve security, stability, and development at an early date. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank Messrs. Pedersen and Fletcher for their briefings on the situation in Syria. It's been more than 5 months now that the dictatorship imposed by the Assad family collapsed. The transitional path followed since then is tough, and France would like to stand alongside the Syrian people so that the enormous hopes that have been raised since December 2024 are not disappointed. This was the meaning of the visit on the 7th of May last to Paris of the President of the Transitional Authorities, Mr. Ahmed al-Sharaa. President, I've got 3 messages. Firstly, we have the responsibility to help in Syria's recovery and to facilitate its reintegration into the international community. Without an economic recovery, there will be no sustainable peace in Syria or no safe, lasting and voluntary return of Syrian refugees. This being the case, the Council of Ministers of the European Union announced yesterday, on the 20th of May, their intention to lift economic sanctions on Syria in order to support its economic recovery. This European decision recalls the consistent commitment of the EU since 2011 to stand alongside Syrians who have fought for their freedom and dignity. We interpret the announcement of President Trump in Riyadh on the 13th of May as part of the same movement of support for Syria and for its economy. In parallel, the humanitarian actors must be able to do their work without any hindrance and be supported, including financially, by the entire international community. The needs in this area are immense. France supports the efforts of the UNHCR in this regard, and we also support the work of the UNHCR in ensuring the return of refugees for those that wish to return. With regard to the reintegration efforts of Syria within the international community, we welcome the spirit of openness shown by the transitional Syrian authorities to renew contact with the rest of the world. Syria's neighbours have a particular responsibility in this regard. They must help it to respect its commitments, including that of not posing a threat for its neighbours. To this end, we call upon Israel to not carry out unilateral actions that are likely to worsen community tensions in Syria or to complicate the political transition. France reiterates our call for Israel to put an end to its military activities on Syrian territory and withdraw from the area of separation established in the disengagement agreement of 1974. Syria and Israel must take into account the security concerns on each side. Moreover, France intends to continue with its work of facilitation and contribute to the resolution of the various border disputes between Syria and Lebanon. Mr. President, secondly, the Syrian authorities must do everything possible to restore peace to society and put an end to interfaith violence. The attacks against the Druze population to the south of Damascus at the end of April revived the spectre of interfaith violence 1 month after the massacres against the Alawite community. It is up to the Syrian authorities to do everything within their power to re-establish harmony between all components of Syrian society. The implementation of the principle of accountability must serve as a roadmap for the transitional authorities. In this regard, the results of the Commission of Inquiry on violence in the coastal area is awaited with great expectations. Their credibility and impartiality will be a measure of the willingness of the government of transition to ensure that Syria respects all of its components. In the long term, it is genuine transitional justice that must be established with the support of the United Nations. We encourage the Syrian authorities to build further upon the momentum of cooperation begun with the United Nations. And finally, we expect that the commitments taken with regard to the Syrian Kurds will be implemented. The call of the PKK to lay down their arms and the announcement of their disbandment is an opportunity to be seized upon in order to preserve the unity and territorial integrity of Syria. Thirdly, the Syrian authorities must make progress on the building of inclusive political institutions if they are to build the Syria of tomorrow. The formation of a transitional government and the publication of a transitional constitutional declaration are encouraging signs. Efforts aimed at inclusivity, however, must be materialized, in particular during the upcoming composition of the Legislative Assembly. The national dialogue exercise must continue and become more broad-based. France reiterates its preparedness to support the Syrian authorities to ensure the success of the political transition in accordance with the major principles detailed in Resolution 2254 of the Council. We have expressed our willingness to support the administrative capacity of the Syrian state, and this was reiterated to President al-Shara in Paris on the 7th of May. We welcome United Nations work in this regard, particularly the work done by Geir Pedersen. Cooperation of the Syrian authorities with the Special Envoy of the Secretary-General must continue, and it must be structured, basing itself on the strategic review currently being conducted by the United Nations Secretariat. A stable Syria implies, finally, the eradication of the terrorist threat. This threat remains high. For this is a priority issue for France and for the Council. It is essential that the authorities in Damascus continue their fight in this regard against this threat and address the issue of foreign terrorist fighters present within Syria. Moreover, the international community expects the dismantling of the chemical weapons program and calls for the continuation of cooperation of Damascus with the OPCW. Mr. President, the political transition underway could provide an opportunity to give Syria a better future, and it could become a hub of regional stability. The international community must provide all of its assistance. In order to do this, it needs the Syrian authorities to do their part. This involves responding to the expectations in the area of inclusivity, the fight against terrorism, and the protection of the population. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Envoy Pedersen and OCHA Director Rajasingham for their briefing today. And I welcome the participation of the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic as well as other countries of the region. We are encouraged to hear about the UN's progress in strengthening engagement with the new Syrian government. I'll make 3 points today. First, we welcome President Trump's announcement of the lifting of US sanctions. This positive step will create significant opportunity for economic recovery and development across Syria. This follows the UK's decision in April to lift our own sectoral sanctions on areas including trade, energy production, and finance. We remain steadfast in our commitment to supporting the Syrian people in rebuilding their country and economy. Second, whilst economic recovery is vital, it must go hand in hand with an inclusive and peaceful transition that reconciles Syria's diverse groups. The UK was appalled by the attacks this month against the Druze community in Syria. There can be no lasting peace or better future for Syrians unless all of Syria's communities are protected and fully included in Syria's political transition. We call on all parties to reject violence, engage in dialogue, and ensure the protection of civilians. We note progress in reconciling Syrian groups into centralized structures. Existing agreements, including those signed with the Syrian Democratic Forces and with the Druze leadership, should now be implemented in full. We also call on Israel to refrain from actions that risk destabilizing Syria and to respect Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Third, as the new Syrian government enters its third month, we look forward to seeing a clear timeline for next steps in the political transition. We welcome and stand ready to support the newly announced National Commissions for Transitional Justice and for Missing Persons. Both will help Syria heal and move forward after years of suffering. This political transition should be inclusive and allow Syrians to have a say in what comes next. President, in conclusion, the UK stands ready to support the Syrian government in their next steps on the path towards a more prosperous, peaceful, and stable future that the Syrian people deserve. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and welcome, Foreign Minister, for presiding this meeting, important meeting. I have honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the members of A3+, namely Algeria, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and my own country, Somalia. At the outset, A3+ extends its sincere appreciation to the Special Envoy, Geir Pedersen, and Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham for their briefings. We also welcome the participation of the permanent representatives of Syria, Iran, Qatar, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia in today's meeting. Mr. President, at this pivotal juncture in the Syrian crisis, A3+ reaffirms its steadfast commitment to the comprehensive and lasting political solution anchored in the principles of United Nations Charter, international law, and the respect for Syria's sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity, and which reflects the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people. We remain guided by the conviction that peace in Syria cannot be imposed from outside, but must emerge from within through a process that is truly Syrian-led and Syrian-owned. In this regard, A3+ reaffirms its unwavering support for an inclusive Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political process in line with the key principles enshrined in the Security Council Resolution 2254. This process must safeguard the rights and the participation of all Syrians, regardless of ethnicity or religion, and ensure their protection. A3+ remains convinced that only a genuine, inclusive, Syrian-led transition with a robust backing from the international community can lead to a lasting peace and stability. We therefore renew our full support for the tireless efforts of the Special Envoy in advancing this process. The credibility of this process hinges not only on the inclusive dialogue, but also on the restoration of trust between the Syrian people and the institutions that serve them. Mr. President, we are deeply alarmed by the continuing reports of the violence across various parts of Syria. The A3+ condemns in the strongest terms all acts of violence against civilians and any action that risks inflaming sectarian tensions. We call for an immediate measures to protect the civilians, restore calm, and prevent further incitement to the communal violence. All parties must respect the international humanitarian law and human rights law, and we underscore the imperative of accountability for violations committed against civilians. We note and support the ongoing efforts towards de-escalation and welcome the interim authorities' engagement in dialogue and cooperation with the framework of national unity. We also commend the decisions by the Syrian authorities to establish a committee on missing people, missing persons, and encourage the constructive cooperation with the independent institutions for missing persons. Addressing the plight of missing is a fundamental to reconciliation and accountability. Mr. President, we strongly condemn Israel's repeated violations of Syrian sovereignty, including the recent airstrikes near the presidential palace in Damascus. Such attacks not only undermine the regional peace and security, but also exacerbate sectarian tensions and create an environment conducive to a resurgence of terrorist groups. We call for an immediate end to all Israeli incursions into Syrian territory and reiterate our call for the complete withdrawal of all Israeli forces. We call for full compliance with the 1974 disengagement agreement. Moreover, we underscore the Golan Heights remain Syrian territory under the international law as reaffirmed by the Security Council Resolution 497 of 1981. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in Syria remains dire. The needs continue to grow, including with the return of 800,000 Syrian refugees and over 1.1 million internally displaced persons, IDPs, returning to their homes. By all accounts, the resources mobilized for the humanitarian response in Syria remains vastly insufficient. We note with concern that the recent Brussels conference yielded only 200 million in pledges, an amount that falls far short of the scale of the crisis. We urge all donors to honor their pledges and to urgently scale up humanitarian assistance while ensuring its delivery in accordance with humanitarian law and humanitarian principles. The long-standing imposition of unilateral coercive measures has significantly undermined the ability of the ordinary Syrians to meet their basic needs. In this regard, A3+ welcomes the recent decisions by the United States and the European Union to lift the sanctions on Syria, a step that aligns with our continued calls for a meaningful and comprehensive sanctions relief. While we welcome this development, we believe it should be part of a broader re-engagement strategy that ensures assistance reaches those most in need and supports local recovery initiatives. Sanctions relief is critical to unlocking regional support, revitalizing the Syrian economy, and enabling the Syrians, both within the country and across the diaspora, to contribute actively to the rebuilding their homeland. It's also necessary step to facilitate Syrians' integration into the global financial system. This is of particular importance as the World Bank has estimated the cost of Syrian reconstruction to over $250 billion. Mobilizing such resources will require coordinated international action, political will, and above all, the lifting of barriers that continue to hinder the recovery. Mr. President, Syria faces immense challenge, but it also holds a great promises. If approached with openness and inclusion and international support, Syrian political transition and reconstruction could be a beacon of recovery and stability in the region. Let me close by reaffirming that A3+ remains fully committed to doing everything within our power to help build a stable, sovereign, inclusive, and prosperous Syria, free of conflict, division, and foreign interference. A Syria that once again contribute to the peace, prosperity, and stability for the whole region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome you here presiding over our meeting at the Security Council. I'd like to thank the Special Envoy of the Secretary-General for Syria, Mr. Geir Pedersen, and Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham from OCHA for their valuable briefings. And we recognize the presence of the representatives of the various states that are joining us today. The situation in Syria continues to be one of the most complex and urgent on the international agenda. This being the case, Panama reiterates that only a comprehensive, inclusive political process led by the Syrians themselves with the support of the international community and under the auspices of the United Nations will be able to provide a sustainable solution to the conflict and contribute to stability in the Middle East. In this regard, Panama reaffirms the validity and centrality of Resolution 2254, which not only establishes a roadmap for a political solution, but also underscores the importance of unconditional respect for the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic. This resolution highlights, moreover, the fundamental role of the United Nations in facilitating the political process and in supporting the prevention and eradication of extremism as a part of the path towards peace. Although violence in the conflict has diminished in very many areas of the country, the persistence of sectarian violence and the pockets of insecurity threaten to undermine efforts at reconstruction and reconciliation. The recent episodes that we've seen in the suburbs of Damascus and Homs remind us of the unstable context and the urgency for the new authorities to promote an environment of security and confidence, where all communities, particularly minorities, feel that they are protected, represented, and heard within the political process. President, Syria continues to be the epicenter of one of the most serious humanitarian crises of our times. 3/4 of its population require assistance, more than half are suffering from food insecurity, and more than 7 million people remain displaced. According to the World Bank, around 50% of the health centers in the northwest of the country are not operational. Northeast of the country are not operational, affecting more than 1.5 million people. This health crisis is hitting women with greater severity, limiting their access to maternal and reproductive health care, and increasing their risks during pregnancy and after birth. Given this situation, it's imperative to reverse the trend of cuts to the funds for humanitarian assistance, guaranteeing the necessary resources so that the United Nations agencies and their partners are able to continue to provide assistance to those that most need them. Equally, Panama is closely following the efforts of the new authorities aimed at building an independent and impartial legal system which will guarantee accountability for international crimes. Within this framework, we recognize positively the initiatives of the Qatar International Search and Rescue Group in identifying human remains, and we encourage cooperation to continue with specialized mechanisms established by this organization. In the area of governance and accountability, we appreciate the signals of openness shown by the new Syrian authorities. These have been key in the review of international sanctions. And we are optimistic with regard to the recent announcement with regard to the partial lifting of sanctions. This is a positive step taken in the right direction, and we agree with Special Envoy Pedersen that these measures must be translated into tangible improvements for the population, particularly with regard to access to basic services such as health, education, and the means of subsistence. We are confident that these measures to lift sanctions, which we hope will be comprehensive and progressive, will contribute to generating conditions favorable to a voluntary, secure and dignified return of refugees and displaced persons. Mr. President, Panama reiterates its call upon all actors involved to persevere on the path of dialogue to avoid politicization of human suffering and to guarantee, without exception, protection of civilians in accordance with international humanitarian law and human rights. In the midst of such suffering, we continue to believe that Syria has the potential to become a symbol of reconciliation, reconstruction, and hope. A Syria where multilateralism prevails over conflict, in which human dignity is at the heart of all efforts. And in this regard, please be assured that my country will always...
And I'll now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, President. At the outset, I would like to welcome you in this session and to congratulate you and the Greek mission for your effective steering of the Security Council's work this month. I also extend my thanks to Mr. Pedersen, the Special Envoy for Syria, and Mr. Raja Singham, Director of the Coordination Division, OCHA, in Geneva, for their briefings. Mr. President, a few months ago, speakers in this council unanimously emphasized the need to seize the historic opportunity emerging for Syria and the region, and to act swiftly to make the most of it before it slips away, before hope slips away, before hope is lost, and before despair takes hold of the Syrian people who have long suffered from oppression and deprivation. Today, we are witnessing the international community's eagerness to embrace this pivotal moment, reopening its doors to Syria and engaging actively with it. This clearly culminated with the visit of the President of the United States to the region, which included key milestones and constructive decisions, most notably President Trump's courageous decision, announced from Riyadh, a location of great symbolic significance, to lift sanctions on Syria. This decision capped the tireless and appreciated efforts of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, alongside Turkey, Qatar, and the UAE, and many other brothers and friends in the region and the world. I also take this opportunity to thank our friends in the United Kingdom, France, and other European countries that have taken steps to ease sanctions on Syria. This was followed by a historic meeting that brought together the leaders of Syria, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. The meeting focused on supporting early recovery and reconstruction, exploring Syrian-American partnership, encountering terrorism, and neutralizing non-state actors and foreign armed groups, non-Syrian foreign armed groups which hinder stability, including ISIS and other threats. This meeting reflected regional and international support for Syria as it moves forward with confidence and hope. The meeting was followed by another meeting between the foreign ministers of Syria, the United States, and Turkey in Antalya to discuss the details of lifting U.S. sanctions on Syria, improving relations between Damascus and Washington, and building a strategic relationship between the two countries. Arab support for Syria was also evident in the Baghdad Declaration issued at the recent Arab Summit, which reaffirmed respect for the choices of the Syrian people, commitment to Syria's security and stability, support for its territorial integrity, and rejection of all foreign interference in its affairs. The declaration strongly condemned the ongoing Israeli attacks on Syrian territory, violations of Syria's sovereignty, and attempts to undermine and destroy its national capabilities. Mr. President, as countries in the region and around the world extend their hands to Syria, Syrians themselves are uniting across all components and factions. They are rejecting extremism, terrorism, hate speech, incitement to violence, and calls for division. They are moving forward on the path to building a future based on freedom and dignity in a unified Syria whose hallmarks are progress, prosperity, knowledge, and work. Syrian institutions are committed to the highest international standards, enhancing the investment climate, reforming economic legislation, and providing the necessary facilities to empower both national and foreign capital to contribute effectively to reconstruction and comprehensive development. The new Syria, in its sincere pursuit of becoming a state of peace and partnership, not a battleground for conflicts or a platform for foreign ambitions. The new Syria welcomes constructive cooperation initiatives based on mutual interests and mutual respect, away from polarization and bloc politics. Syria pledges to remain loyal to those who stood by it in its time of hardship and will never forget those who extended a helping hand during its most difficult moments. In this context, I would like to express my deepest appreciation of the common brotherly initiative launched by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the State of Qatar to provide the necessary funding to provide the salaries of the public sector in Syria and to provide us with the necessary funds to back the energy sector. Mr. President, the decision to lift sanctions on Syria marks a long-awaited turning point. It offers real prospects for alleviating the humanitarian crisis and accelerating economic and developmental recovery. Syrians have welcomed this decision with great hope. They saw it as a first step towards restoring normal life, improving living conditions, reviving the economy, ensuring food security, and confidently returning to the path of sustainable development. Despite the difficult circumstances and ongoing suffering, clearly reflected in the figures presented in the briefing of Mr. Rajasingham a while ago, recent developments opened the door to a promising environment for work and investment, for the rehabilitation of the banking sector, and for a gradual improvement of infrastructure and the resumption of essential services, especially in energy, health, education, and agriculture. These steps will help consolidate security, stability, and promote civil peace, which in turn will improve the humanitarian situation and accelerate the safe, dignified, and voluntary return of refugees and displaced persons to their regions. We reaffirm that the magnitude of needs requires an exceptional international response, a response based on genuine partnership and support for national institutions. This should include a coordinated and effective assistance to enhance efforts in mine clearance and removal of war remnants which continue to claim lives, disrupt production, and hinder return. It is also essential to mobilize efforts on the dossier of missing persons in Syria, which is a humanitarian dossier whose resolution would end the suffering of thousands of families that have lost loved ones. In this context, an independent body has been established under the name National Commission for the Missing Persons, tasked with searching for and uncovering the fate of the missing and forcibly disappeared persons, documenting cases, creating a national database, and providing legal and humanitarian support to their families. In the same vein, and in recognition of the need for transitional justice as a cornerstone for building a state of law, ensuring victims' rights, and achieving comprehensive national reconciliation, the National Commission for Transitional Justice was established. It is responsible for uncovering the truth about grave violations committed by the former regime and holding the perpetrators accountable. Mr. President, while regional and international efforts are converging to support stability and development in Syria and the region, Israel continues its aggression against Syrian territories. The latest of these was the Israeli attack on the vicinity of the presidential palace in Damascus in a grave violation of international law and of relevant Security Council resolutions and the 1974 disengagement agreement. This is in addition to the continued illegal presence of the occupying army in parts of the governorates of Quneitra, Daraa, and in rural Damascus, south of Syria. Syria renews its calls on the Security Council to shoulder its responsibilities and take firm and immediate measures to compel Israel to cease immediately its ongoing aggression against Syrian territory and to withdraw immediately and unconditionally from all Syrian territories, including the occupied Syrian Golan. We also call on the member states to play an active and constructive role to help stop this aggression, which obstructs the path to the stability and prosperity that the region and its peoples aspire to. In conclusion, Mr. President, as Syria moves forward with confidence towards the future, it believes in peace as the optimal path to build a stable and secure future for all the peoples of the region. peoples who have been drained by wars and conflicts. The experiences of past decades have shown that there is no solution but dialogue, and no true and lasting stability without ending occupation and sincerely pursuing peace, in accordance with the UN Charter and principles of international law. The new Syria is extending its hand to all who sincerely seek to support its stability. Syria affirms that with the will and determination of its people, it is moving forward. Recognition of the need for transitional justice as a cornerstone for building a state of law, ensuring victims' rights, and achieving comprehensive national reconciliation, the National Commission for Transitional Justice was established. It is responsible for uncovering the truth about grave violations committed by the former regime and holding the perpetrators accountable. Mr. President, while regional and international efforts are converging to support stability and development in Syria and the region, Israel continues its aggression against Syrian territories. The latest of these was the Israeli attack on the vicinity of the presidential palace in Damascus, in a grave violation of international law and of relevant Security Council resolutions and the 1974 disengagement agreement. This is in addition to the continued illegal presence of the occupying army in parts of the governorates of Quneitra, Daraa, and in rural Damascus, south of Syria. Syria renews its calls on the Security Council to shoulder its responsibilities and take firm and immediate measures to compel Israel to cease immediately its ongoing aggression against Syrian territory and to withdraw immediately and unconditionally from all Syrian territories, including the occupied Syrian Golan. We also call on the member states to play an active and constructive role to help stop this aggression, which obstructs the path to the stability and prosperity that the region and its peoples aspire to. In conclusion, Mr. President, as Syria moves forward with confidence towards the future, it believes in peace as the optimal path to build a stable and secure future for all the peoples of the region, peoples who have been drained by wars and conflicts. The experiences of past decades have shown that there is no solution but dialogue, and no true and lasting stability without ending occupation and sincerely pursuing peace, in accordance with the UN Charter and principles of international law. The new Syria is extending its hand to all who sincerely seek to support its stability. Syria affirms that with the will and determination of its people, it is moving forward to build a resilient, open, and secure state, one that respects the law, safeguards rights, and harnesses its resources for the well-being of its citizens, and to build a future rooted in a culture of peace and tolerance, bringing stability and prosperity to the entire region. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. In
the name of God, the Compassionate, the Merciful, thank you, Mr. Minister. We welcome your presence and thank you for chairing this meeting. We appreciate Mr. Peterson, the Special Envoy, and Mr. Rajasingham, Director of the Coordination Division, for their insightful briefing. Mr. President, on the situation in Syrian Arab Republic, I wish to make the following points. First, Iran welcomes the growing international acknowledgement that humanitarian and reconstruction aid in Syria must not be politicized. We note the recent announcement to lift and suspend unilateral sanctions by the United States, European Union, and the United Kingdom. These steps, so long overdue, are positive. The suffering of the Syrian people should not be used for political purposes. We call for the full and unconditional lifting of all unilateral sanctions. These illegal measures violate the UN Charter and international law. Today, more than 16 million Syrians need urgent help. Any easing of sanctions must lead to real and immediate improvement in their lives. It must also support the return of refugees and help rebuild Syrian economy and infrastructure, paving the way for lasting peace and stability. Second, Syria has the right and responsibility to maintain peace and security throughout its territory. However, its security remains fragile due to the ongoing foreign military presence and illegal occupation, especially in the northeast and south. The continued occupation of the Syrian Golan by Israel clearly violates international law and Security Council Resolution 497. Israel's repeated attacks, including the 2 May airstrike near the presidential palace, must be firmly condemned. These acts threaten the region's peace and are made possible by the U.S. support. We strongly reaffirm the Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected. All foreign forces that are illegally in Syria must withdraw immediately and unconditionally. It is evident that only the Israeli occupying regime stands to benefit from the fragmentation and instability in Syria. Its persistent act of aggression, repeated violation of international law, and continued expansion of occupation are clearly aimed and perpetuated a state of permanent instability in the country. Third, as a close neighbor, Iran emphasized the need to fight all forms of terrorism in Syria, especially the threat posed by the foreign terrorist fighters. We are deeply concerned about reports that the FTFs are being relocated from Syria to other conflict areas. This could increase instability in the region and pose serious risk to neighboring countries. The Security Council must remain alert and respond through strong and effective measures. We welcome the PKK's announcement to disarm and regard it as a significant step toward rejecting violence and enhancing regional stability. We express hope that the other affiliated armed and terrorist groups, including PJAK, will follow this path, contributing to lasting peace and security in the region. Fourth, the people of Syria have suffered from foreign occupation, terrorism, and economic pressure. We emphasize that the Syrian future must be decided by the Syrians alone, without outside interference or imposed solutions. Any political process must be led and owned by Syria, in line with Security Council Resolution 2254. Iran fully supports the UN Special Envoy, Mr. Peterson, and his efforts to promote an inclusive process. This process must be respect Syrian sovereignty and proceed without foreign pressure. In this context, Iran supports the dialogue between the Syrian interim authorities and the SDF as an important step toward national integration. We encourage inclusive engagement and dialogue that ensure equal rights for all Syrians. I thank you, Mr. President.
Representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I now give the floor to the representative of Qatar.
شكرا لكم السيد الرئيس في البداية.
Thank you, President. At the outset, we would like to congratulate you on your presidency of the Security Council this month. We'd like to thank Mr. Geir Pedersen, Special Envoy of the Secretary General, and Mr. Rajasingham, representative of OCHA in Geneva. Thank you for your edifying briefings. We join ourselves to the statement delivered on behalf of the Arab group. President, Qatar welcomes the positive steps undertaken by the Syrian Arab Republic so as to achieve national reconciliation and lock in the rule of law and institutions. This included the holding of the National Dialogue Conference, Constitutional Dialogue, as well as the appointment of a new government. This paves the way towards a state underpinned by justice and freedom. We would like to commend the Syrian government's openness. In other words, its cooperation with the various international organizations and the United Nations. This clearly reflects Syria's determination and eagerness to play a positive role at the regional and international level so as to restore security and stability as well as to protect human rights. Qatar is continuing its comprehensive support to Syria in emergency assistance and relief. Furthermore, we're helping Syria's recovery, including via exports of natural gas, which are being used to generate electricity. Within the framework of the Qatari and Saudi Arabian efforts to help the Syrian recovery, we have helped clear Syria's debt to the World Bank, roughly $15 million. This will help the World Bank to resume its programs in Syria to help institutional building and capacity building as well. Turning now to technical assistance. A Qatari security team has accomplished a humanitarian mission in Syria in the city of Dabiq. This operation resulted in the remains of 30 people being found. They perished at the hands of Daesh. This is being addressed in coordination with the Syrian government and international partners. On the diplomatic front, Qatar is seeking to further Syrian interests within the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. President, by way of conclusion, Qatar would like to reassert the fact that the improvement of the economic and humanitarian situation in our brother nation, Syria, should be a topmost priority for the international community. We welcome the decision taken by President Donald Trump to lift sanctions on Syria. This is an extremely important step which will foster stability and security in Syria. We'd like to pay tribute to the efforts undertaken by Saudi Arabia and Turkey to this end. Qatar would like to reaffirm its support for the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Syria. We condemn, in the strongest possible terms, the Israeli raids targeting the presidential palace neighborhood in Damascus. Furthermore, we condemn repeated attacks on Syria in flagrant violation of the sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic. Qatar would also like to reiterate our intention to contribute to the realization of the Syrian people's aspirations. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Qatar for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am pleased to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab Group and would like to thank your presidency, Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Hellenic Republic, over this session. I would also like to thank Mr. Geir Petersen and Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham for their insightful briefings. Mr. President, Syria is currently undergoing a difficult and decisive phase, confronted by a series of interconnected challenges that are affecting and applying pressure to the state and citizen at the same time. The challenges are immense, and the economic situation is fragile, and despite everything and all the pressure and crises, Syria continues committed to creating a more stable future, one that upholds the rights of its people without discrimination and allows them to live in dignity within a state where security, justice, and equality prevail. The Syrian government has exerted relentless efforts towards national reconciliation and recovery. However, the road ahead remains long and complex. It demands comprehensive international support, genuine political will, and strong solidarity from the global community to help Syria rebuild its state institutions, fulfill the aspirations and needs of its people, uphold its
sovereignty and establish the foundations for a lasting peace. In this context, the Arab Group underscores the importance of supporting a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political process that ensures the inclusive participation of all components of the Syrian population, including women and youth, in a way that safeguards Syria's unity and security while upholding the rights of its citizens. The group reiterates its firm rejection of any form of division or fragmentation of Syria. We similarly oppose any foreign interference in Syria's internal affairs. In this regard, we welcome the initiatives and agreements that aim to unify all Syrian factions under the authority of the state and to promote civil peace and reinforce national unity. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in Syria demands urgent attention from the international community in order to support the Syrian people in their efforts to rebuild their country. This includes investing in economic recovery and early recovery projects to help meet the basic needs of the Syrian people and create the conditions conducive to the voluntary, safe, and dignified return of Syrian refugees and displaced persons. In this context, the group acknowledges the vital role played by host countries over the years and expresses sincere appreciation for their vital efforts to support Syrians and provide them with a decent standard of living, and we emphasize that host countries cannot continue to shoulder this responsibility alone. The international community is required to provide the necessary financial and technical support to host countries to enable them to continue fulfilling this humanitarian role on its behalf until all refugees can return to Syria. On another front, the Arab Group stresses that rebuilding Syria is a comprehensive process and that the impact of sanctions extends far beyond the economic sphere. In this regard, the group calls for the immediate and complete lifting of all unilateral coercive measures and other economic and financial sanctions imposed on Syria. These measures directly affect the well-being of the Syrian people and hinder the transitional political process, ultimately undermining the efforts to support peace and development in the country. In this context, the Arab Group welcomes last week's announcement by United States President Donald Trump regarding the lifting of sanctions on Syria. This marks a pivotal step toward opening new avenues for economic cooperation between Syria and the international community, contributing to the prosperity, development, and stability of the brotherly Syrian people. The group also commends the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for its role in this regard, and we also welcome the European Union's recent announcement yesterday on lifting economic sanctions on Syria as a means of supporting the Syrian people's efforts towards recovery and the reconstruction of their country. On the security front, the Arab Group expresses its deep regret over the recent violence in Syria, which undermines the government's efforts to restore control and extend its sovereignty across its territory. In this regard, the group strongly condemns the repeated attacks by the Israeli occupation forces on Syrian territory, including the recent strike near the presidential palace in Damascus, as well as ongoing attempts to interfere in Syria's internal affairs. These actions pose a serious threat to regional stability and constitute a blatant violation of international law and the 1974 Disengagement Agreement. The Arab Group urges the Security Council to fulfill its responsibilities and compel the Israeli occupation forces to stop these violations and respect Syria's sovereignty and fully and immediately withdraw from all occupied Syrian territory. The group also calls for enhanced regional and international cooperation in the fight against terrorism, including Daesh and other terrorist groups and elements, to prevent the resurgence of terrorism or its spread beyond Syria's borders. We further underscore the importance of collaborative efforts in securing the borders and combating the smuggling of drugs and weapons. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Arab Group reaffirms its solidarity with Syria and its people, and we express our full support for both national and international efforts aimed at establishing a secure, unified, and sovereign Syrian state, one that reflects the country's rich history and important role in the region. We further emphasize that Syria's security is an essential pillar of Arab security. This calls for coordinated regional and international efforts to help realize a peaceful and prosperous future that fulfills the aspirations of the Syrian people and that safeguards their dignity and rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the representative of the United Arab Emirates, and I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome Your Excellency and congratulate Presidency of Greece once again. I would like to express our gratitude to Mr. Pedersen and to Mr. Rajasingham for their comprehensive briefings and reiterate our support to their essential works. As we convene today here, we are presented with a genuine opportunity to support Syria on its journey towards lasting peace, stability, and prosperity. Since December 8, Syrian administration has taken concrete and promising steps to restore security and stability across the country. These steps must be met with decisive and constructive engagement from the international community. In this regard, we welcome the recent decision by the United States to lift all sanctions on Syria. We also commend the UK's and EU's announcements concerning sanctions. These are timely and vital developments. Lifting sanctions and alleviating economic pressure on Syria and its people will significantly accelerate reconstruction efforts, which are critical to achieving stabilization, recovery, return of refugees, and ultimately reconciliation. Turkey has played an active role in diplomatic efforts to help remove this key obstacle on Syria's recovery. The high-level meeting held between President Erdogan, President Trump, President Shara, and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, as well as the trilateral meeting among Foreign Minister Fidan, Secretaries of State Rubio, and Foreign Minister Sheybani in Turkey, have laid an important foundation for this new phase. We stress the importance of the swift and full implementation of the agreed steps. Any delay would only prolong instability and human suffering. Mr. President, comprehensive and sustained reconstruction efforts also remain urgent for Syria. Millions of Syrians continue to live abroad or are displaced internally due to widespread destruction and slow pace of rebuilding. Since December 8, more than 500,000 Syrians have returned to their homeland. Additionally, 1.2 million internally displaced persons have exited camps and returned to their areas of origin. However, millions more are still waiting for the right conditions to be established to return in a safe, dignified, and voluntary manner. Turkey, therefore, calls upon the international community to scale up support for reconstruction. Investment in infrastructure, basic services, and livelihood creation will directly contribute to regional stability and allow millions of displaced Syrians to return home. We also believe that empowering Syrian institutions and strengthening their capacity is essential for effective governance. Mr. President, we reaffirm our position that any development in Syria must uphold the country's unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. We call on all segments of Syrian society to exercise restraint, refrain from provocations, and prioritize calm and stability. Turkey calls for the immediate and full implementation of the agreement between Damascus and the so-called SDF in a manner that ensures a single centralized administration across Syria. Turkey remains ready to cooperate with the Syrian administration to secure detention centers and camps in the northeast and to prevent any resurgence of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, particularly from Daesh. In this context, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon are coordinating efforts to establish a regional mechanism to combat Daesh. This is a serious commitment from our side. We reiterate our call on Israel to cease its actions that violate Syria's sovereignty and threaten regional peace and security, and to withdraw immediately. The full implementation of the 1974 Separation of Forces Agreement must be ensured by this Council. Mr. President, we welcome the recent announcement by the Syrian administration on the establishment of a National Commission on Transitional Justice and a National Commission on Missing Persons. These are significant milestones in addressing the legacy of the conflict and fostering national healing. Transitional justice is not only a moral imperative, but also a practical necessity for durable peace. Victims have the right to truth and justice. Preventing the recurrence of past violations is central to building Syria that is inclusive and just for all Syrian citizens. A stable and unified Syria, which is at peace with itself and its neighborhood, and does not offer a safe haven for terrorist organizations, will support regional security and prosperity. Turkey remains committed to working with the Syrian administration and all partners in supporting the Syrian people as they build a peaceful, unified, and prosperous future. Let us seize this moment of hope and turn into tangible progress on the ground. Mr. President, Turkey continue always to be a good neighbor for Syria and Syrian people. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for the statement. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Saudi Arabia to participate in this meeting.
معالي السيد جورج غرابيتيس.
Excellencies, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to begin by congratulating Greece on your presidency of the Security Council for this month. We very much appreciate the outstanding efforts of the Greek mission in conducting the work of the Council this month. We would also like to thank Special Envoy Geir Pedersen, Special Envoy to Syria, and the Director of OCHA, Mr. Rajasingham, for their briefings with regard to the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia aligns itself with the statement made by the UAE on behalf of the Arab group. And in this regard, we'd like to reaffirm the importance of the economic security and political and social independence of Syria. This is extremely important for the entire region. The Kingdom considers the recent developments in Syria to be positive, given the national constructive attitude that we have seen. regionally and internationally, this approach is serving the interests of all components of Syrian society and is making it possible to speed up development and progress in all of these aspects in order to respond to the aspirations of the Syrian people, so that they can have a prosperous and flourishing future. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Kingdom has always been keen to support our Syrian brothers and sisters at all the stages that they have experienced, particularly with regard to the vital issues that they have faced since the beginning of the conflict. We have always tried to find political solutions to all problems to guarantee the unity and territorial integrity of Syria. My country's government, over the years, particularly recent years, has provided consistent, uninterrupted aid to the victims of natural disasters and those victims of events in Syria on the basis of the close relations that unite the Saudi and Syrian people. We, in this respect, welcome the decision by President Donald Trump in response to the request of Saudi Arabia to lift the U.S. sanctions on Syria. This is an important step to help reconstruction and economic recovery efforts in Syria. We also welcome the announcement by the UK and the EU to lift their sanctions on Syria. That will have a positive impact to promote trust, confidence in Syria and its efforts to consolidate civilian peace and enable this country to move resolutely towards stability and prosperity. We are in favor of all efforts undertaken by the international community that will assist in reconstruction in Syria during this crucial stage, which requires everyone to play their part. President, my country, together with Qatar, has decided to support the private sector, particularly the energy sector in Syria, in order to speed up the provision of basic services and relaunch the work of Syrian institutions. We have worked to facilitate the integration of Syria once again in the World Bank in order to support the efforts of the Syrian government with regard to their policies and the meeting of the needs of the population for economic recovery by helping the private sector, encouraging the private sector to invest, extending indeed the efforts of the Kingdom to provide food security in cooperation with UNDP as well. We have implemented a program that aims to provide food security in Syria. In conclusion, the Kingdom reaffirms the importance of respecting the sovereignty and unity and territorial integrity of Syria by providing full support to Syria's efforts to bring about peace and stability. The Kingdom condemns the Israeli incursions within Syrian territory, and we also condemn the Israeli raids and strikes against regions of Syria, and we reiterate our categoric rejection of all of these Israeli attacks, which are violating the sovereignty of Syria and harming its stability and security. We believe that this is a flagrant violation of international law and the Disengagement of Forces Agreement of 1974. We call for an end to these Israeli atrocities in Syria and in the region because they violate Syrian sovereignty, and we would warn against the persistence of these Israeli violations because this simply exacerbates the instability and the threats facing the region. We are opposed to any kind of division and breaking down of Syria, and we support the sustained efforts deployed by the Syrian government to bring about national reconciliation. And we also welcome the holding of the National Dialogue Conference in Syria and the signing of an agreement calling for the integration of all military and civilian institutions under the umbrella of Syrian institutions, and we welcome all measures taken by the Syrian government to safeguard civil peace and efforts aimed at pursuing the rebuilding of the institutions of the state in order to respond to the aspirations of the Syrian people and ensure the fabric of Syrian society under the Syrian government. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Saudi Arabia for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.